Hey, how's it going? It's Rissy. I have decided to start a series of YouTube videos as part of my once every 2 week promise. This series will be answering questions about cameras that I get asked very commonly at one of my jobs where I work in a camera department. I get a lot of questions from people. They'll come in and they'll say things like, hey, I watched a bunch of videos on YouTube, but I still don't know what the difference is between this and that, or I still don't know which camera I should get, or I'm having trouble shooting in these conditions. Can you offer me any tips? Hey, I'm new to video. Is there any, what do I need? Those kinds of questions. And so this, I'm hoping, will help some of you figure out those little key differences. I was going to start with a series. My first was going to be which camera is right for you, but I get more frequently asked what the differences between Nikon, Canon, and the new Sony mirrorless cameras are. So I'm actually going to address that question first, and then hopefully once I answer the question, then I'll be able to refer to this video when I talk about what camera you should get. So if you're curious about that video, you may want to subscribe so you can see when I upload it. But let's get started. So in order to understand the biggest differences between the big chunky Nikon and Canon cameras and the new smaller Sonys, more specifically looking at the A5100, the A6000, the A5000, because those are the most commonly sought after cameras and most often referred to when comparing them to the Nikon, the Nikon 55, the 5500, or the Canon T5i. First, you have to understand what is happening inside the camera. So I'm going to do a really simple explanation of the differences. I have my camera here, right? And so this is a traditional Nikon camera. It's got the mirror on the inside. So what happens is I point the camera at something I want to take a photo of. The image goes through the lens into a little mirror inside the camera, which flips it up into the eyepiece. When I look through that hole, what I'm seeing is the real world. When I decide that the framing is right and I want to capture it, that little mirror flips up and then the image goes to the sensor, which captures it and transfers it to the SD card. What happens in a mirrorless camera is that the image passes through the lens directly to the sensor, and the sensor actually feeds a small digital reproduction of what it sees to the eyepiece. So when you look through, it's almost like you're looking at a little TV. It's not actually what you're seeing in the real world. It's not the same thing. It's a digital recreation. Some of the key benefits to getting a mirrorless camera right now, because there's no mirror there that has to move every time you want to take a photo, it's got a super fast autofocus system. Sony is actually known to have some of the fastest autofocus systems on cameras on the market today. Additionally, because there's no motor inside, the device can be smaller and lighter weight. It's actually very small. I'd say almost half the size of like my cameras. So it's really good in respect to portability. Additionally, when you're out shooting, when you're using a camera like this, because what you're seeing is actually what's out there, you adjust your shutter speed and your aperture and then your ISO, and you take the shot, and you have to review it to make sure that it looks good, because the final product is going to be different than what you're seeing depending on if it's night or day. With this mirrorless, because the feed to your little eyepiece is directly from the sensor, whatever changes you make to the aperture and the ISO and the shutter speed, you will see in the eyepiece right away. So you'll know before you take the photo if it's the way you want it or not. Some of the disadvantages to getting that smaller system, depending on what route you take when you're shooting, you could you may end up wanting to get bigger, heavier lenses for zooming, for example, sports events, portraitures, those kinds of things. And while the camera is very capable, it's also very light, which means when you slap on a bigger lens, it's going to make it off balance. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable to hold. At least to me, when I put a big lens on there, the disproportion in weight is weird and it's uncomfortable. If you're a person with larger hands, you might feel a bit cramped because the body is so small, all the buttons are very small. It doesn't have a deeply recessed grip. It's all very flush. So when you're shooting, you could end up, getting like your hand tired after a while from, being in working in such small constraints on the body of the camera. A little bit of tech jargon for those of you who shoot and you shoot in RAW. The A Alpha series from Sony does not shoot in uncompressed RAW like Nikon and Canon. For example, Nikon shoots in 14-bit uncompressed RAW. And the difference between a RAW and a JPEG, for those of you who don't know, think of RAW as exactly what it sounds like, a raw photo. It isn't processed, it's just the camera capturing as much information as it can. And JPEGs are more finalized. You can work with them, for example, in Photoshop and Lightroom, but you don't have as much wiggle room. You can't extract as much information from shadows and from highlights as you can from RAW, because when you shoot in RAW, the camera will capture a few versions of the photo in one shot. It'll shoot a few versions lighter and a few versions darker, and it's all in that one photo. All that information is in that one photo. So when you're editing it, if you're trying to pull detail out of something that looks like it's black, you may actually be able to. With JPEG, you don't have as much wiggle room. And so when you're shooting with Sony, because they use the compressed lossy file, you don't have as much flexibility. And one of the other things to consider when you're going for Nikon, Canon versus Sony in terms of future expenditures for lenses and things, the Sony line, Sony does have an adapter, so you can use Nikon and Canon lenses there. It doesn't come with the kit, you'd have to purchase it separately. But if you wanted to stay with just Sony, their lenses compared to Canon and Nikon, they have fewer, they're more expensive, and there are different mounts that you have to be aware of. For example, the Alpha line, like the A6000, uses an E mount. There are others that use an A mount, so just be careful for that. The other day I was doing a comparison with a customer, and a 50mm lens from Sony was $250, and the same lens from Canon was $200. And I'm sure you can find them used and for cheaper, but if you're wanting to buy them brand new in a retail location, you may have to spend a little bit more out of pocket. But that sums up this video. I hope that it was informative. If you have questions, and I'm sure you're gonna have questions because I'm sure I left some stuff out, I'm just trying to be quick and concise and simple. But if you do have questions, please go ahead and leave them down below. If you're interested in seeing what other videos I publish, go ahead and subscribe, and thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.